They've come across a trench position, and the trench has got overhead cover, setting a machine gun up to give covering fire into the next tree line. I've been undershelling. It is horrific, it is adrenaline filled, and it is very, very scary. I'm Phillip Ingram. I was in the British military for 26 years and have been involved in operations at just about every level, from a junior officer right through to a full colonel. And I was a NATO planner. So understanding what is going on in Ukraine is my bread and butter. And today I want to give you a flavour for what it's like on the ground, to give you an understanding as to the real difficulties that there are at the tactical level in some of the things that the Ukrainians are being asked to try and do to clear the Russians out. And it'll hopefully give you an idea as to why the Ukrainian counteroffensive is going so slowly but deliberately, and give you an insight to some of the horrors that they're having to put up with on the front line as they fight to try and eject the Russians who've illegally occupied their territory. Here we see the Ukrainians getting out of the back of an M113. I can tell it's an M113 because of the track marks and the door that's there. We see the blue around them so they can identify that they're Ukrainians. And the vehicle is moving forward, giving them cover as they patrol alongside it towards this wood line. We can hear a lot of shooting in the background, but and the Ukrainians are starting to fire into the tree line as they go in to clear Russian defensive positions that are in there. Running into a trench, firing over it. They're clearly quite happy that this trench has already been cleared and are using it for their own cover as they move forward towards the Russian lines. Setting a machine gun up to give covering fire into the next tree line as individuals prepare to assault that position. The trenches, you can see, have been hastily dug, probably by an excavator, definitely not by hand, looking at the way the spoil is. More Ukrainian M113 armoured personnel carriers going past. And here we see a large artillery shell coming in and the explosion that's around it. I can't begin to describe the way an artillery shell sucks the air out of you, and the noise is horrific. The Ukrainians clearing the trenches, firing into administrative holes that are in there for the Russians to live in, clearing it with explosives, i.e. grenades, first and foremost, before going in and firing into the trenches to the positions where they think the Russians may be hiding. There is no mercy for anyone that's left in the trenches. This is infantry clearing. If it was the cavalry clearing it with armoured vehicles, they would go across and just do U-turns and multiple turns on top of the trenches and just cause them to collapse. This trench here that we can see with the overhead cover, the one thing that gives it away are the white sandbags, and that's pointing directly to where the trench positions are. These have been hastily dug. The Russians are showing very little discipline in what they've got in there, and are clearly not too worried about the fact that they can be seen. When we see the Ukrainians patrolling just behind the M113 armoured personnel carrier that's moving forward, it shows that they are a professionally trained, well-practiced force that's moving forward effectively, using their armoured vehicle as cover. The difference between an M113, which is an armoured personnel carrier, or other vehicles that are described as infantry fighting vehicles, is the M113 is a battlefield taxi. It gets too close to the enemy's position. The troops then have to get out and fight, and they'll use the vehicle as cover if necessary. But that's because it is lightly protected, whereas the infantry fighting vehicles, the Marders and the Bradleys, can fight through a position and then discharge the troops on the other side, because they've got much better protection and they've got much better firepower on the vehicle to get them through the enemy's position. When we see the shell coming in, a couple of things struck me. One, the Ukrainian troops didn't flinch. They're used to this. They've seen a lot of it. I've been undershelling, and when a shell comes in that close, it almost sucks the air out of you. You then get the shock wave that hits you in your stomach and vibrates your diaphragm. And there's thousands of little bits and pieces of metal that are rocketing around the place. And most people would duck and hit the ground very quickly. These Ukrainian soldiers clearly have been subject to a lot of this because they just carried on what they were doing. They've come across a trench position, and the trench has got overhead cover. Firing going into the trench position, you can see where it's going around a corner, and what they're trying to do is check that there are no Russians in the trench. And in this case, there's a grenade just about to be fired in a few seconds. Now, we didn't see the grenade go off, but that's what's caused that smoke that's in there. And then they get into the trench to try and clear what's inside. They're looking inside to make sure that there are no Russians that are sitting in there who could come and take them from behind, but also then to try and exploit the position to see if there's anything of intelligence value that's there. What this isn't showing you is, and I'm putting across, is the amount of adrenaline that will be surging through the Ukrainian soldiers as they do this, and the real horror and the real noise that there is. We can hear the shooting, we can hear the explosions, but it doesn't give an accurate feeling for what it is that's going on. Now, the trenches themselves, the overhead cover is there to provide protection from artillery, from mortars, and to keep individuals visually protected whenever they're carrying out a lot of their administrative tasks and just surviving, because often you can be in these trenches for weeks, if not months. Again, we're seeing another trench examined here. The overhead cover has been damaged. A grenade goes in there. Everyone takes cover. Boom, the grenade goes off. It's a dull thud because it's mulled by the mud, and then they will shoot in afterwards. The litter that we see around the trenches is a sign of an ill-disciplined military. The difficulty with it is, as it's strewn all over the place, it actually acts as a big beacon saying there are human beings here. And when you've got the trenches that are covered by tree canopies or everything else, you've got lots of UAVs flying around. If you've got good trench discipline, sometimes it's very difficult to find these trenches. However, if there are these signs, lots of litter around, badly positioned sandbags and other things, it's very easy for the Ukrainians to pick up exactly where the trenches are, to mark them on their maps, and then to carry out a deliberate military operation in to clear the trenches, as we're seeing. Here we have the Ukrainians in an M113 armored personnel carrier. The door is just opened and they're exiting fast, or as fast as they can out of the back. They're very cramped, these vehicles, for all of the people that are in there. As they come out the back, they're clearly not under fire. So the vehicle is stopped before they get into somewhere where they can be in direct fire position from the Russians. They go into a set of woods and they're starting to deliberately clear trenches. Again, we see the grenade going in first, the explosion, followed by firing from the semi-automatic rifles that they're carrying before they move on to the next trench. They're patrolling through these woods carefully. You can see the damage around the trees. These trees have been subject to artillery and mortar fire that's come in. That has probably been put in there prior to the Ukrainians going in to clear the trenches. They've been subject to that for quite some time. The trees get quite badly damaged, even in the summer months, and you can see that, obviously. Ukrainians are patrolling carefully through these woods, looking for more trench positions. They're not always obvious. And here I think we'll see them firing into the undergrowth where there's another potential trench in there, and they're then going through their clearance processes to make sure there are no Russians available or no Russians around in that position. And here we can see the entrance to that trench that we couldn't see, well camouflaged. Preparing a grenade, pin out into the overhead cover, take cover, grenade goes off with a thud, followed by semi-automatic fire into the trench. Well constructed and well camouflaged trench positions, as we can see in some of the positions that are here, are very difficult to find. The Ukrainians will have done a lot of work beforehand to using their drones to prepare an understanding of where the trenches are, even in the woods that are there. A lot of these trenches will have been built before the leaf coverage will have come in, so they'll have hopefully mapped them, and they'll have rehearsed in their minds on the ground, with models on the ground, how they're going to assault each of the trenches and where they're going to go through, because this has to be a methodical process that they work through clearly. What's obvious is that these teams are used to working with each other. They're very good at working together and pointing out where potential threat positions are coming from and dealing with them sequentially. It's a very professional team, and you can tell it's all one team because they've got these blue pieces of tape around their helmets and around their uniforms so that they can identify each other quite easily, and we don't get incidences where in the confusion, and there is real confusion in this sort of fighting, in the confusion they accidentally shoot each other. There's clearly artillery in the background, or mortars coming in the background, and a lot of firing going on in the background. So they're keeping low as they move forward, still clearing the different trench positions. We can see all the litter that's around as well. Again, this is highlighting where trench positions are. The trees are damaged by artillery fire. We can hear the artillery shells coming in. So they're moving through the woods, moving towards the edge of them to the open ground, before they then move forward. We can hear the discussions over the radio, and this is coordination going on, not just between the troops and the patrol, but it'll be going back to their higher commanders as they discuss what's happening. Ukrainian troops in trenches. You can see some of them have got green tape around them, some have got blue tape around them. There'll be different subunits. They're holding that position as the ones with the blue tape are moving through the woods and going out into the open ground. Shell comes in on the left-hand side there, and the clearance of the position is continuing. This has clearly been an artillery position, looking at some of the litter and detritus that's left around the place. And why he's just fired in the air, I don't know. It could have been he saw a UAV. The Ukrainians clearly are very close to the Russians now and are firing through the undergrowth to try and keep their heads down, probably while other troops are moving in from a slightly different direction. As you're pushing forward through the woodland, the woodland gives you a false sense of security. It doesn't protect you from the shrapnel that's coming from shells or high-velocity bullets that are flying around, and you can't see where the enemy is. So progressing through those can be quite difficult. But then when you get to the open ground, what you then have to do is keep the enemy's head down. You keep the enemy's head down by suppressing it through artillery, through mortar fire, and through the use of your machine guns aimed at enemy trench positions. And then you will go forward in tactical bounds. The Ukrainians advancing into built-up territory. It's buildings, and buildings are always very difficult to clear. They've fired an explosive round in through the roof to try and clear any Russians that are inside the building, and they're going through building by building to make sure that there are no Russians that are left in there that can snipe at the Ukrainians as they start to move forward. We see covering fire going in from automatic fire here before the Ukrainians move forward, and a lot of the buildings have got cellars in them, and clearing the cellars can be quite difficult. So grenade goes in first, automatic fire, more automatic fire, and then I think we'll see them throwing another grenade in because he's not sure that he's cleared it. There's the next grenade going in, taking cover. The explosion goes off, and then they decide to go into the cellar and make sure that it is clear and there are no Russians hiding in there. A lot of the cellars, a lot of the built-up areas have been booby-trapped as well. So this is something that the troops will be cognizant of as they go through these difficult positions. Fighting through built-up territory is extremely complex and requires a lot of discipline and a lot of time. These clips show very clearly from a tactical perspective how difficult it is and how complex it is going in, clearing each trench by trench, each building by building, each room by room as they're going forward over what is a huge area. During the first Gulf War, the Allies had the luxury of 37 days of bombing to clear a lot of these areas before they then put troops in on the ground. The Ukrainians don't have that. They're having to go piece by piece, meter by meter, and fight for every meter of Ukrainian territory as they're getting through. And when they come under effective Russian fire, that slows them down. The Ukrainian offensive is going slowly from a political perspective, but from a military perspective, there's only so much of this you can do in a day. There's only so much that the troops can do of this before they have to be rotated out to get some rest. Otherwise, you just burn them out completely. This is why a ground counteroffensive is extremely slow, because it has to be slow, it has to be deliberate, otherwise you can get it very wrong.